Hi, I'm Ian Sefferman alongside my colleague Patrick Haig, and this is From Nothing, the podcast where we go deep with healthcare founders on how they actually got started in this crazy industry. Today we're joined by Sina Chehrazi, co-founder and CEO at Nayya. Nayya takes the guesswork out of choosing and using your employee benefits. Nayya was founded in the fall of 2019, and in a period of just 364 days between 2020 and 2021, Nayya raised $50.7 million across 3 rounds. We talk with Sina about how and why he raised that capital, how in the earliest days of the company, your vision and deck should change meaningfully every single day, and how he hopes everyone at Nayya becomes the CEO of something. Let's dive in. So Sina, why don't we start with like the very, very simple stuff, which is to say, tell us how you got this business off the ground and why you got this business off the ground. Where's the genesis of this?
The genesis. I grew up in a healthcare family, son of a surgeon, a lot of shrinks. So Thanksgiving was always, you never talk too much. And I was always really intrinsically interested in healthcare more generally, but also, I don't know, in a way self-conscious or, a lot like pretty big shoes to fill across the board. And you don't always want to run into the same direction of the people who came before you. So instead I decided to go into like the opposite, or I don't know, what I felt like was an opposite direction. Uh, Went and started studying business and technology and data. I worked for a tiny 5-person startup after school, in the data space, actually, helping analyze data for insurance companies and healthcare companies. And went to law school. I became more and more in love with data, and data privacy and data security and just anything data, because I guess I'm sort of interesting like that, or not, frankly, and ended up helping build a couple of data businesses. But as the years went on, as an early employee, as the years went on, just kept getting pushed back or pulled, I'm not sure, back into healthcare and insurance. And the reality, as you spend enough time with a fresh enough perspective and enough naivety, is that you start asking the question, this is such a big space. This is such an important space. Um, but really, when I met my co-founder, now co-founder Akash, the question we kept asking was, why is the consumer always left behind? Not like sometimes left behind, but always left behind. With the exception of some of these direct-to-consumer digital health companies, which frankly are on the newer side in terms of healthcare's history. But honestly, even in the cases of those direct-to-consumer companies, you're still asking the question of, how is this not a completely consumer-centric solution? So many dollars, so much time, so much complexity. And when you actually have to use healthcare, it is insurmountable. If you went to law school and are the executive of a company and you have a healthcare episode, which like literally speaking recently happened to me, you feel the same thing, that you feel loneliness, confusion, um, discouraged, right? And if you're not all of those things, then it's the same feelings, but perhaps even more exacerbated. And so we were asking that question enough times to the point where we said, all right, something has to be done. We're not really sure what it is. It's probably a company. Not really sure what it's named, but Nayya sounds good. And and the work we're really going to do is figure out, how do we take the world's data, and instead we're going to link it and clean it and help everyday consumers make smarter, faster, more efficient, personalized healthcare and benefits decisions. And that was the genesis. You kind of jump in, and what sounds really sort of sexy and starting up on the outside is actually quite scary and painful on the inside. But best choice I ever made.
Awesome. What was the date that you guys had that original kernel of that idea?
Oh goodness, it's really hard to. Frankly, honestly, the first day Akash and I ever met, the first coffee we ever went to, so 2018. So it took quite a while to, like, a better part of a year to really take that leap. But um, yeah, it's when you're starting a business, which I think a lot of people are interested in starting a business, you spend a lot of time trying to perfect the idea, the gap. And if you think about it for too long, you'll think of too many reasons not to do it. Um, and we thought about it for pretty long, and with all the cons, we still wanted to do it. It was yeah. So that was about the date, the timeline.
Cool. Okay, and then when did you formally go like full time on it?
Full time was um, October of October of 2019.
October 2019. Okay. And so throughout 2019, then you're like, you guys are talking about it, you're thinking about it. What did you have when you? It sounds like early 2018 or sometime in 2018, you guys met and you like had that kernel of that idea. October 2019, so 12 plus months later, you actually take the leap. What did you guys have? What did you add to the kernel of the idea by that point? Did you know exactly what the product would look like? Did you have any idea what the product would look like?
Oh my God. I mean, if you're asking us then, we knew exactly what the product looked like. If you're asking us now, we knew nothing, like
Yeah.
literally nothing. The common theme throughout has been how do we use data to help consumers create better consumers of healthcare and insurance, right? But yeah, but no, what we had was literally we started actively working on like a deck in July and a few other things. So we probably had like work product in a way within a couple months of that. So but more like bootstrap weekends,
Yeah.
sort of thinking about what we wanted to do. And yeah, I think the product was not. I don't want to say it was totally different than it is today, but it definitely is pretty different.
Yeah. What was it at that point? Like, what did you guys believe at that point?
So what we what we were really focused on at that point was uh, wow, throwback. But it was really like, how do you use data to expose consumers as better underwriting risks to health insurance companies, right? Um, that was it. We were like, okay, let's help them get a better price, right? Like let's help them like and you learn so many things really quickly, but that was the idea.
Amazing. Okay, that's really cool. Okay, so then when did you learn like that's not the thing?
When you talk to first you're thinking about the product, right? Then you're thinking about the market. When you talk to the market and you get that feedback on your product, then what you hear are things like, um, how are you going to go to market? Are you going to be a lead generation service? Are you going to sell to the insurance companies to improve like lives for the consumers? Well, then there's a totally different roadmap here. Are you going to charge consumers for the service? Is there even a market for that? So you talk to consumers, you talk to insurance companies, you talk to lead generation companies, you talk to anybody who would be a buyer, a partner, or a competitor. And what you start to hear is early feedback of like, that's really cool, but that's really cool, but that's really cool. But have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I'm feeling this pain. In those early days, I would argue, it's more important to be able to pivot your business every 72 hours than um, anything else, right? Uh, I think you give really bad people a really good idea and it's never going to take off. You give like pretty good people a terrible idea and it will be an incredible business, right? Because it's just the idea is so malleable and the velocity of change that you have as one, two, three, or four people is incredible. So in those days it was I mean I distinctly remember our deck that I would work on every weekend in between and it would change. It changed those first like I don't know, June, July, August, September. It would even October, it would change every single weekend, but not like change like, oh, we're going to change slide 7. It was like, all right, slides 3 to 9 are gone. And now they're this in between. And that's like on one side, really demoralizing because you're like, wow, I have no customers, no product, no revenue, no job. Everybody's like, "What are you doing?" We're starting up. That doesn't mean anything. And but if I could go back and just talk to myself in those moments, I'd be like, "You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing." Just like if you can't, like your competitive advantage, like you have no competitive, you have no resources, you have no brand, right? Your literal competitive advantage is the ability to listen, synthesize information, and move faster than even now, like Nayya of today. It's like turning a barge, compared to that. So anyway,
Uh, Speaking our language, that's exactly how we think about it. So you go full time. You start the business October 2019. When did you raise your first amount of money? How did you finance the business once you got started?
so we did a pre-seed round in which we like don't really like talk about, not because of any like reason actually now that I think about it, other than it just like wasn't much of a round. It was from the Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, and also um, one or two other angels. So it was a few $100,000 less, and we raised that in October. We raised that in September and October. It was kind of like the jumping off point where we knew, okay, no matter what, um, student loans, New York City rent, everything else, like we're gonna have 6 months of oxygen, 7 months of oxygen. And when you're leaping, you're like 6 months. Wow, what a luxury,
Yeah.
my ties. But then when you start, you're like, oh my God, by the end of the day today, I'll have used like X percentage of our runway. So it's a sort of a different vibe. And that was an expensive round of capital for sure. But it gave the confidence. It gave the confidence that we were going to go and do this. So
Okay, and sort of like what was the milestones that you guys were trying to achieve with that tiny amount of money?
um, literally take a deck and a prototype and get it to a product.
Cool. So you're just trying to get the first bit out the door.
Yeah, like I guess I should modify that. Get a deck and a prototype into a product with beta users.
Okay.
That was sort of this is what we're gonna do. And if we can do this in the next fill in the blank 4 months, then 5 months, then we can raise a seed round.
Yep. And is that how it played out?
Exactly how it played out.
Okay. So what did the product look like after those 4 or 5 months, and then what did the seed round look like?
So the product was a um, is what it is today, more or less, with highly different features and a completely different go-to-market model. But it was, Nayya provides software that and at the time we called it Companion, which that was short lived. So when you're a startup, just like keep things simple. Everything's hard. Just the branding stuff, just like keep it simple. Let's call it Nayya, or like now we call it Choose and Use because like we're creative like that. So just keep it simple. Nobody's like, oh, Companion, you sound so cool. No, they're like, what is that? So Companion would help employees at businesses choose and use their healthcare and their other non-healthcare benefits, like what's best for me and my family. How do I use this? Was I charged too much? It's starting to sound more like the Nayya of today. How do I find a doctor in my network? Right. The difference was we were like, we're the smartest people ever, right? But employee guidance software never been more important. Healthcare has never been more complicated. This is like pre-COVID. We raised our seed round. We launched our seed round March 1st, 2021. So 2 weeks before the accelerator shut down, 2 weeks before New York sort of closed. And that was a very tough time, because um, it's hard enough, like it's hard enough.
Yeah, and presumably you guys were like starting to run on fumes. You had that 5-6 months amount of runway, and you're like, oh, we're kind of running up to that. How long did it take you to raise your seed?
So we didn't actually close. It's interesting because of the way like safes work, and that's something that I would tell early stage entrepreneurs. Like people are like gonna throw all this like open and close and raising and not raising, whatever else. Like it's a piece of paper. It's like usually 2 or 3 pages. Someone signs it, you take money. Like just don't, again, keep it simple. So we started getting checks in March, and we stopped taking checks, if I can describe it that way, after demo day. Demo day was on May. I can't remember the exact dates, but May, and I think we accepted our last check like May 30th, or you know, somewhere in there, right? Plus or minus a couple weeks. And we raised over $2.5 million, like 2.6, 2.7, and we were like the richest Maharaja of, I don't even know what. It was like, oh my God, we are the kings of the world. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
How are we gonna spend this? But it was really, the narrative was, right, like the same very same narrative that it is today, right? Healthcare, everything I said at the beginning, right? It's insurmountable, and people need help. And the consumer is our North Star and should be everyone's North Star. Creates a better market. The interesting thing between March 1st and whenever it closed is we had enough conversations with enough people, and we had actually deployed our product. We had beta users, right? Everything that we wanted to do. Even I think by February, we had 1 or 2 beta users that were like using the product. But what the interesting thing was, we talked to enough people, right? The whole product and market dynamic. I'll never forget one conversation with a really nice Texan gentleman who ran a really big company, who passed on our product. Now is a customer of ours. They bought a year later. And he said, look, I love your product. I just really don't want you to be my insurance broker. And like, no offense to you two kids, but like, would I buy this for my 3,000 people? Yes, for sure. And at the same time, like the 8 groups we were the broker for, 8 companies, small businesses that we were the broker for, I was like, wow, this is so much work. This is unbelievable. And so by the time we closed, Nayya was an enterprise software company that would charge companies for the software, and they would buy the software. And our whole go-to-market distribution model is empowering brokers and empowering carriers and empowering HR systems and empowering HR people. So Social Leverage, who led our seed round, like our first meeting with them in like again, end of May, whatever it was, like it was like, hey guys, what's new? Congratulations, you did it. Yeah, by the way, like our entire business model is different now. Like, how are you guys doing? What else is new on your end? And they're so awesome. Social Leverage is really awesome. Those are the moments where like you just don't sleep the night before, because you're like, oh my God, I have these investors now, and like and then you get on the phone, you tell them this, and they're like, cool, how can we help? Right? And it's just then you're sort of like, all right, this really good. Social Leverage is a really good example of what you want a seed fund to look like and feel like as an entrepreneur. So anyway, that was the day after that meeting that we started experiencing an incredible amount of growth. I mean, we launched like the priced software product 2 weeks later. We transitioned all of our small business groups that were the broker from out, said bye to money. That's not something you're really used to doing when you make no money, and started closing our first customers June 2020, 13 months ago. And it's been some varying degree of painful and exciting hyper growth every single day since then.
That's so cool. So how did those first customers come about? Like, where'd you find them?
introductions from the new seed investors, cold calls, cold emails, hustling, introductions from friends of friends.
Were you looking for a particular type of company at all, or like how did you narrow it?
Anybody who had would talk to us. Anybody, sorry, anybody who had at least at that time 100 employees. Now we're a little more upmarket, but 100 employees.
Okay, cool. That's amazing. And what did sales cycles look like? Like, how did you guys get them on board so quickly? Like, you guys made a ton of progress really quickly.
Our sales cycles have always been really fast. Um, that's a really hard question to answer for back then. I'm gonna say all of all of that, like 1 year leading up to June, or 11 months leading up to June of last year, or like even the full time, the 8 months or whatever the math is, all of those pivots, all of those iterations, all of those changes got us to a place where we had built something that people really wanted and developed a go-to-market system that was complementary to so much existing infrastructure in this industry today, that and had set a pricing model that was like, listen, 2020, we're not really thinking about pricing. 2021, we're not even really thinking about pricing. Let's just think about penetration. And like, you add all those things up, and then you put a pandemic where, so like, I don't want to make us sound like we're just totally lucky, but frankly, yes, right place, right time, where you're saying we're selling solutions that are going to help give your employees financial peace on their best days when they're just making the choices of purchasing, and give them confidence on their worst days. And you, like, all of that collides in one place, and it's like an explosion. It's like a total, when you're demoing a product in and you're two people, and like the person and you have like no customers, and the people on the other line are like, this literally is giving me the chills, this is awesome. Then you start to realize, wait, I think like we're actually onto something. And then when that clicks, it's like, all right, time to hire people.
That's so cool. So can we dive in like a little bit deeper then, about the go-to-market strategy, or just the sales cycle in general, and like how you guys are handling that from, say, top of funnel? And this doesn't have to be back then necessarily, like kind of like over the last year. And for listeners, I'll like I'll maybe foreshadow what ends up happening. But you guys ended up raising an $11 million Series A in January, I believe.
October.
October. Okay.
We announced it in January.
Okay. And then in June, you raised a 37 million Series B
in May, and announced it in June.
Okay. So like within a span of 7 months, or I guess if you think about it, it's like in a span of 12 months, you raised 3 rounds of capital of 50 some odd $million, right?
Yeah. So in 21 months, we did 4 rounds of capital, if you include the pre-seed, but yeah, 3 rounds in 364 days.
364 days, really?
Whatever it was, yeah. So.
Wow, unbelievable. Okay, cool. Well, first of all, just congratulations. That's amazing. And second of all, like, yeah, let's talk a little bit about I think like your business to me is fascinating in 2 regards. The first is that hypergrowth, just for like how you guys managed to make the sales cycles so short on the employee benefit side, where I think many people would say, oh my God, it's so freaking long. And then the second piece is the data piece. Where like how you guys are using data, how you guys are collecting data, and ultimately helping consumers with that data. But let's start on the former side. So, like, can you give me maybe just sort of like the typical, how does somebody find you? How do you find somebody? And then how do you engage with their company? Who in the company do you sell to? Who makes the decision? Like, what does the sales look like, really?
Yeah. And Christian, feel free to jump in. I mean, we sell to the CHRO, who's the influencer, typically, sometimes the buyer. CFOs, otherwise the influencer or the buyer. Occasionally you see a COO in there, uncommon. I'm trying to think of the other questions in there. We sell three ways. One is direct to the employer. Um, we have our entire marketing team on the phone right now, so it's usually either some kind of like brand awareness um, or thought leadership or word of mouth. And then the last way that we sell is to insurance companies who buy the product and then give it to either directly to the employer or to a broker to give it to the employer. Um, the thing is like, and then if you add HR systems who have, let's say like not the same margins, so then you don't really want them to be your end customer. We sometimes sell through them, but together these four entities, the employer and the carrier that we view as our customers, and the broker and the HR partners the HR systems we view as our partners, right? They all form this like orb, and you have to find go-to-market people who can understand the product implications on each one of those parties within the org, because guess what? None of those parties are our North Star. Our North Star is the consumer. And so that's quite complicated. However, it can also be like a crowbar, because insurance companies work with many brokers who work with many HR people who know other HR people who have different brokers who work with many different other insurance companies. And when you build something that's really differentiated in a very crowded, hectic industry, then word of mouth can travel like wildfire, and it's really exciting. To your last question about sales cycles and employee benefits, my advice to any entrepreneur in the healthcare space, and particularly the employee benefits space, and we haven't been successful yet, and we're still, I don't like when I hear people say top of the first inning, but like we're still pretty early. Listen to 10 other co-founders present on their employee benefit solutions, or 20 if you can manage to get the access, and you will understand, or you will hear a lot of the same things that are said over and over and over again, and to the same person, like to the same, and that person, the HR executive, I'm a huge believer in HR. Like not from a vendor perspective. Like we hired our head of people at 16 employees, which was non-traditional, and one of the incredible decision that we made. And we're trying to redefine even internally like what's the perception of HR. But that person is like generally quite exhausted. They were like a little bit tired before the pandemic, where costs were rising, budgets were reducing, and like having a seat at the table is like sometimes more difficult in less progressive organizations. And then the pandemic happened, and then they were dealing with a lot of stress and a lot of what I call a sort of like having lived through that 14-month experience or whatever it was, like employee vulnerability. Like nobody, they would never necessarily use that word, but right, like people don't go into HR because they just want, like they go into HR because they care about people. And then now this like venture dumping of cash to finally modernize this really old industry. And so like all these new point solutions, like this person's really tired. And so you can't go in saying all the same things, building all the same things, alleging all the same things, and expect to have a fast sales cycle. It doesn't matter. Like it can be employee benefits, it can be healthcare, it can be cybersecurity, it can be synthetic fraud, right? It's just not, that's not a sort of winning solution. So that would be my advice.
I was actually kind of curious, how did you get your first broker relationship established? Was it through network introduction, and what did it look like to have to convince them to sell you?
We brought on a lot of advisors early on and gave them equity in the company. And one of them introduced us to a broker, and the broker liked our product. When you're at that stage, offer anything. Hey, we'd love to give you half of our software fees. Hey, we'd love to put your name on we'd love to, like, whatever it is, like we'd love to do it for you. And that particular broker, who was progressive, was like, I don't know, no offense, your pricing is not enough. That you can keep your 50% of your software fees on this thing, but I'd love to I'd love to take you to one of my customers, right? And in that moment, if one thing goes wrong with that first customer, you are dead. You are. This is our advisor telling us this, and so um, we were just like night over night, just making sure that. But when you secure the trust, and it's the little things you do over time, like, hey, we just got this inbound. They say NFP is the broker. We work with you guys. Do you know the person who's the broker here? Just want to check by them, right? Like those little things that you do, like they go a long way because other venture-backed tech companies are not doing that. So that's sort of like how it started, and that's how the introduction came about. That's what the conversation was like. That's what happened after, and that's how we
was it kind of just lucky that you got an intro to a progressive broker who had that appetite?
You could say it was lucky, but if I remember the 45 other conversations I had, which were like a hard no, then you maybe make your own luck.
I mean, I'd love to actually it sounds like a lot of this was product led. Like you had the product, it was highly differentiated. It was just a damn good thing that stood out from the noise. I'd love to kind of talk about that, of how, especially a data product, of how did you stitch this together? Like who did you need to go to really put this thing together from a data source perspective? That in healthcare, when we think of data, it's highly siloed, very opaque.
Yeah. Okay. So is the question how did we sort of decide to build the product and what we built, or is the question
more of how did you build?
How do we view Nayya as differentiated?
You're okay, we want to do this. Here's the data sources we need. Here are the partners we need to talk to get that data, other than user generated data.
Yeah. Okay. So first and foremost, my co-founder Akash is an unbelievable, insane, incredible full stack engineer and data scientist. And he had been doing that since he was 15. And I had been working at these data startups where essentially I was brokering. I was brokering. I've never said it like that, but I was brokering external data. So I was selling data to insurance companies and healthcare companies. I knew all the data sources. I knew the products. And so I think you have to start one step back to actually answer the question. What we've always said is the internet companies have made, usually when we're in a more filtered or not less public environment, an unconscionable amount of money by closing consumer data loops, right? You bought this shirt, you may like this hat, or you read this article on Google News, you may like this other article on Google News, right? They always have that closed consumer data loop, aka the cookie. And if it's not the cookie, then they'll find something around it. Unfortunately, for 300 million people, United States healthcare is one of the last great open consumer data loops. I went to the physical therapist last Monday. I paid cash. I went to the pharmacy on Tuesday. I used my HSA. I went to the specialist on Wednesday. I was a copay on my insurance. All of that, some of it lives in the same place, but largely that and everything else, the wealth related data, all live in different systems. And so day one Nayya and day infinity Nayya is really a data infrastructure. How do we close that consumer data loop? Because when we know everything about you that's relevant from a wealth and health perspective, instead of, hey, buy this hat because you like this shirt, it's the same personalization, it's the same use case, but it's actually, hey, go to this provider, hey, get this kind of service, hey, you have this available to you, hey, stop doing that, right? And so it was really those experiences and that capability that allowed us to really realize, okay, this is the data that matters, A, here's where we can find it, B, which was sort of a discussion I was very heavily involved in with Akash. And then Akash, okay, great, we're going to go put it together. And he built the whole prototype and the whole V1 of the product as a one man show, zero consultants. So you can't really, in that first year, having an incredible technical co-founder is just, it's insane, the delta that it makes. So that's how we approached that process, which manifested into, okay, choose TurboTax for benefit selection, open enrollment, or new employee onboarding, right? Here's how much you and your family spent out of pocket on healthcare in the last year, right? Now, today, it's because we're connected to 192 health plans and we have the scars to show it. and here's how much your house was when you rolled out of bed this morning. Here's the mortgage that was outstanding. Here's your student debt. You start to think through life insurance and disability insurance and sub health, and like pick this plan, pick this plan, pick this plan. Don't pick this one. Don't pick this one. And like that's something that's very differentiated in our model today, which is we don't make $1. We don't make $1 if you take everybody else is getting paid to distribute, to put it nicely, right? If you take the 9 lines of coverage out of the 17 that are offered, Mr. or Miss Employee who works at Facebook, or one, like we're just here to tell you the right answer from a data science perspective, and then use the rest of the year, which is, if we're going to help you choose the products, we may as well help you use them, for God's sake, and we understand them better than anybody else, including the HR administrator, because we had to take all the logic, all the rules to help you choose them. So anything, something happens to you, hey, we know the plans, there's a trigger here, press this blue button, money back into the household. Or great, you got this prescription. Most Americans don't know that the price of every drug every hour at every pharmacy in America changes. And so here are the 5 pharmacies within 10 miles where you can, we knew where we had to find all that data. We knew what I guess to be more concise, past experience was probably a pretty big, it would have been really hard. And I think healthcare is at a point where non-healthcare entrepreneurs can come in and build beautiful things in ways that maybe even before they never could. And I think that fresh perspective is incredible. With a product like ours, it would have been really hard to come in day one and just be like, these are all the things that matter. Here's how you can find them. Let's go link all the data together and build it. So I guess that's probably not so high value to listeners, other than to say, if whether you're new to healthcare or old to healthcare, think about the things. Don't just think about the business problems that are out there. Think about what you really know, because if it's what you really know plus what you're really interested in,
which kind of brings me to a question I have, was around: did you always know you wanted to be CEO, or like how? What was your journey to being like, I think I want to be a leader of a company? Was it just obsession with the problem?
Yeah. I always found myself in the companies I worked at before, and in the people, and just in my life, and meeting, anytime I had a chance to meet a CEO, just being very curious, and listening intently, and watching not just what people are saying, but how they're saying it, why they're saying it, what they're not saying. And I feel like I was able to learn a lot of different ways. But what I think, in when starting the company and becoming CEO, which frankly back then doesn't really mean anything. You can put whatever letters you want behind after your name. It doesn't. CEO of what? And even now, I'm not really sure how much it means to me, like the letters themselves. It's like what it represents. Being CEO is a big opportunity. It's a big opportunity to empower other people. It's a big opportunity to redefine the rules. Right? If you want conventional outcomes, then traditional approaches are like pretty dependable to get you there. If you want an unconventional outcome, you have to understand, great, there is a playbook. Let's throw it out the window and let's see what happens. We're driving, right? There's no GPS. Let's see where we go. And that takes a lot of courage in the early days. Like in my head, we don't have a CFO. We have a CEO of finance. We don't have, a head of product. We have a CEO of the product. We don't have a CRO. We have a CEO of sales. We don't have a head of marketing. We have a CEO of marketing. Like my role is just, laying down on the tracks and figuring out what else do we need to do to unblock those people. That, and also the intra communication to make sure that everybody's on the same page towards going through that, marching in that same direction. And it's definitely not an easy job, but it's easier when you have really good people around you that you can trust. And I think it's starting to mean something. but it wasn't something so thoughtful going in. You know, I think Akash is one of the most, not only most brilliant engineers, one of the most brilliant product thinkers of a generation. And I think I was able to compliment him in some ways, and around how do you inspire, how do you influence, and how do you tell the story, how do you push things forward. But even then, he's the CEO of so much that goes on at Nayya that it's a very interesting, I think, cultural experience. And I think going full circle, watching those CEOs, I felt like I could see so much in terms of bravery, courage, calm, right? But what I felt like I was missing was sort of, or at least was less visible, is how do you really look to elevate people all around you at all times, right? And I'd love for a year from now, 20 people at Nayya to be doing podcasts like this all over the place and telling that story. That's so much more powerful than just one person.
Yes.
That seems like an amazing spot to end it right there. That was really inspirational.
Yeah, thank you.
Sina, thank you. This is so cool. Really wonderful to hear. I can't wait to see and hear what you guys do in the next 364 days.